All right, let me say a bit about Louise Ballerstedt Raggio. Louise Raggio was a lawyer. She was an activist. She was a member of the Texas Federation of Business and Professional Women's Clubs. So Louise Ballerstedt Raggio, unlike Sarah Hughes, Louise Ballerstedt Raggio had always felt like kind of an outsider. She came from a family where her grandparents were immigrants. Her family was in farming. They were poor. They were so poor she didn't have a store-bought dress or outfit until she was in college. Everything she ever wore, her mom had made for her out of whatever they had. So she was accustomed to being dirt poor, farming, and being considered untouchable and too ethnic by the middle-class people in town. She was also thought to be rather strange because she was very bookish. She was teeny. She was a very petite person. But her mother had great ambitions for her. Her mother had been active in the women's suffrage movement and had told her about this many times, inculcated her with this idea that political activism, that women's rights were things that mattered, that this was kind of her mom's finest hour as a person. And so Louise Raggio had grown up with her mother taking her to the local church hall and making her stand all the way on a stage with her mom in the back of the room, saying, "I can't hear you, Louise. Project. Speak louder." So her mother was really grooming her from day one to be somebody. She was somebody who advanced very rapidly through college, went on to law school. There was something that happened in between that changes her forever and really shapes her approach to reform activity. And that was that she fell in love with and married somebody who didn't fit in Texas. Greer Raggio. He was this fiery Italian-American from the Northeast. He loved to get into political arguments with people. He loved intellectual debates. She and he had a very intense relationship. Unfortunately for him, his service in World War II left him with a lot of problems. He had post-traumatic stress disorder. He had nightmares the rest of his life. He'd wake up screaming from them. And he was a very hard person to deal with. Despite this, they stay married for the long term. They have 3 sons. And so what is it that changes her? Her husband is targeted by McCarthyism. He comes into the crosshairs of people who do these sorts of investigations into whether someone is actually loyal or problematic. He was considered problematic because he and she together had written a letter to their local politician, their local representative to the state legislature, saying that they felt the poll tax was a thinly disguised way to keep African Americans from voting. They thought it was immoral, and they thought the poll tax should be done away with. This was immediately referred to higher authorities as a sign of their disloyalty and the fact that they should be thoroughly investigated. And they were. Her husband lost his job. They lost a lot of their friends. They felt very isolated. And she had the terrifying realization that if she wanted her family to eat, if she wanted to be able to pay the rent, she would have to become the breadwinner. Because who knew if her husband would ever have a steady job again? That is what prompts her to go to law school. That's the burden she's carrying her whole professional life. And it really causes her to kind of be very careful about her public persona and sounding like someone who wants things to be different. She never ever would come out and say, "We need change now, this is not okay, this is wrong." No, she does what she later calls stealth feminism. She doesn't talk about feminism, she never admits to being a feminist until she's 70 years old and a widow. Then she figured it was safe. But in the interim, she basically goes around to the men that she knew in the Texas State Bar Association, and she quietly suggests to them, "Maybe we should work on such and such reform." And when the men say, "Okay, yeah, I could mention that at our next meeting," they mention it at the next meeting, and she exclaims over what geniuses they are. She makes it clear, like, "Oh, what a brilliant man this is. What a good idea he has. Gosh, you're smart." That was her approach. She was not above batting her eyelashes and, buttering people up, buttering men up to get them to do things. She didn't care how you got change to happen. It just needed to happen, as long as she wasn't putting herself out there as some kind of radical. I should mention, she and her husband are reinvestigated, I think it was 2 more times. They spend something like a grand total of 20 years under a microscope being investigated for whether they're loyal. At one point, it's simply because they talked about the United Nations in a favorable way at a cocktail party. That was it. They were in trouble with the government again. So Louise Ballerstedt Raggio, she believed that legal change needed to happen in increments, piecemeal. You identify a problem, you come up with a specific small step to making it better. She believed in working through the Texas State Bar Association and being very quiet about it. Not being flashy, not being confrontational, not getting branded as a radical. That was very important to her. She ends up achieving the Marital Property Act of 1967. This was very near and dear to her heart. Until this passed, all the female lawyers in Texas who were married were technically practicing illegally because they had no right to be signing contracts in their own name. She had to have her husband countersign every contract, every legal document she ever signed. She had to pause and say, "Oh, honey, will you sign this so it's legitimate?" And this is crazy. She said, "We can't have this," she said privately. "We're going to make sure that married women have the right to sign contracts, to sell property, to basically be their own separate legal entities." And she was able to make that happen in 1987. It went into effect in 1968. She did such a good job with that she was then asked by the Texas State Bar Association if she would personally oversee the overhaul of the entire family code of Texas. And in fact, Texas, which had previously had a reputation as the worst state in the nation for women, ends up being the first state in the nation with an overhauled, comprehensive, and coherent family code of law. All the other states in the union are knocking on her door saying, "How did you do that? Will you teach us?" Texas became a role model when it came to family law. One other thing I'd like to mention on the issue of mentorship, she was very good friends with Sarah Hughes, really admired her, looked up to her. Sarah Hughes helped her get her first job. Sarah Hughes knew she was desperate for work. Nobody would hire her because she was female. No one wanted a female lawyer. And so Sarah Hughes picked up the phone and called Henry Wade, district attorney of Dallas, who had a reputation for chewing up and spitting out assistant district attorneys. He was supposed to be a nightmare to work for. He had an opening. So she called him up and she said, "Listen, you have got to hire Louise Raggio. She's terrific." And he ended up hiring her, largely, he said, because he wanted to shut Sarah Hughes up and make her stop bothering him. So Raggio got her start in Henry Wade's office. Raggio was the first woman to have an all-female jury. She's the first assistant district attorney, the first lawyer, to try a case in court in Texas and have an all-female jury sitting on that case. And she said later, "I'm not sure the man got a fair trial, but boy, did we convict him." So women were determined to show they could be tough. They could convict somebody. So that was an example of, this right that Hughes had fought for. Here's her protege, someone she's mentored, being the lawyer who handles that case, the district attorney, assistant district attorney who handles that case.